welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya master Anne-Marie Young. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Anne-Marie, I needed to give you an update. I started to give it to you before the show, but I'll give it to you now here at the beginning of the show, because I was telling you and others over the last couple of weeks about the project I'm working on with my Filipino crew and how we're getting ready to start offering a service to the public at large to help people get into a higher vibrational space. And as you'll remember, that whole project got started because of what we do here on the podcast. Because of how much fun we have doing the podcast and how much it's an energy boost and so forth. And how it's just one of those things where we wish that everybody could experience it, right? Because it's different from listening to the podcast, right? I mean, when you're a listener, there's an energy there, right?
I know. I struggle to sleep when I go to bed after this because I'm just buzzing.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a perfect description right there. Well, our guest knows all about that. He's an expert in this because he also is a podcaster.
Mm-hmm. That's how I measure my enjoyment. Is if I feel energized after the show, then I go, I'm in the right place. I'm headed in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how you know. So anyway, his name is Richard Kraft. His podcast is The Men of the House. And we're going to learn a little bit about that. But among other things, we're going to do something really fun. We're going to talk what it's like to podcast and what the energy of podcasting is. Because it ties in directly to this project that I've been working on. So
awesome.
Welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Give us a little bit of the history of the podcast and how you got into it.
Well, so I started the podcast, what was it? July 26th, I think, 2023. Ooh, okay. And, initially I was sitting at the Waffle House one day, having my breakfast solo, as I often do on vacation. It's my alone time while the wife and the kids sleep. And, you have to sit at the counter, or you can't sit in a booth unless you have two or more at the Waffle House. And so I'm sitting next to other men and I'm on my phone. We're eating our breakfast. They're on their phones. And I'm like, what's their story? What's the person to the right of me? What's the person to the left of me? Like, where are their wife and kids? Are they like me? Are they here for just a little daily dose of peace and quiet? Or what's the scoop? And so I was like, okay, the men of the house, kind of like the men of the Waffle House. And I had a blog. I thought of it as a book. I had a blog because I really didn't have the material for a book yet. And I got laid off in 2020 from healthcare, 9 months into the pandemic, and I mulled around a little bit. And at some point I had applied to about 300 more healthcare jobs and didn't have any luck, or I didn't want to take the job because I didn't want to move far away or take my daughter out of school. And at some point I was sitting there and I'm applying back to the company that actually laid me off. And my daughter goes, why don't you just start a podcast? She goes, do you really want 2 a.m. phone calls again? Do you want this? Do you want that? And my dad had said, maybe you should start a podcast. And of course, as podcasters, we're like, well, what authority do I have to start a podcast? Like, because I listen to them, that makes me an expert, or, and so it's kind of this thing of, I mulled around. I wasn't making any progress anywhere. And then at some point, it was actually June 22nd, 2023. That's my birthday. I just had a birthday. Thank you. I said, I'm going to give up alcohol because it was messing with my brain. And I had heard this podcast that explained what it did to my brain. And it finally clicked, and the depression and the feelings. And I just said, I can't do it anymore. I need to stay at baseline. I need to know where baseline is, and I need to stay there, as opposed to flopping back and forth like an RPM gauge, running out of clutch or something. And then I wasn't in a good place when all this happened. And so I was like, okay, give up alcohol, start walking. And of course I'm listening to podcasts this whole time. And then somewhere in there, it's inserted into your brain, maybe you should start a podcast. And then I come across another podcast, and it was like, they said, oh, we made this using Spotify for podcasters. So I looked that up, and I go to my in-laws' house for a week with my daughter, download Spotify for podcasters, and start the podcast with a phone and a set of headphones. No mic, no anything. And it's kind of one of those things of like, hey, I wrote out a trailer, I recorded a first episode, and hitting that publish button is like, oh, I don't know. Do I want the whole world to know about this? And then, of course, it was a little bit hit and miss. And then there was some point, and it's in there, it's around the November 2nd episode, which is Dia de los Muertos. I decided that there was something that said I needed to be consistent, because I was kind of releasing as I wanted, as I had topics to think about. And I said, I need to be consistent. And so I started kind of with consistency. And then I was able through social media to find some guests to interview and whatnot. And so I kind of started some interviews, and I would kind of do some guests, some interviews. And somewhere, maybe April, I think it was, Alex sent me an email from Podmatch and invited me to the quarterly event they have. And I got on there in April, and kind of since then, it's just been so abundant that I've moved up to releasing 2 a week. So sometimes I record more, sometimes I record 4 to 5 a week, whether it be guests or host combination wise. But kind of to push myself with that consistency is to, hey, let's put out 2 a week, because there just are so many guests, so many bookings, and I've quite enjoyed it. I was editing before this, and I just love, while I'm not a super fan of editing, it's the most time consuming part of it, I do enjoy revisiting a great conversation and kind of hearing some of those little nuggets of wisdom that maybe you missed because you heard them because you're engaged with the guest, but you're engaged in a different way than just a listener. So yeah, it's been quite the journey. So I'm approaching a year. I've recorded over 50. I think this Wednesday will be my 50th release. And next goal is 100. And I'm just I say, as long as I enjoy it, I'm going to keep doing it, but it resonates with me. And, the thing is like I explained to people, healthcare, as healthcare people, I don't think it's what we do. I think it's who we are. And so the podcast it's that same me. It's that same kind, caring, compassionate me that wants to help people. But I actually have a larger reach through a podcast than I do managing 2 clinics. I can actually touch more people other than the people in that area that utilize that clinic, and the people that report to me, and the people I interact with. So, going through that, thinking my identity was kind of destroyed after 12 years and the layoff, and that being the first time I'd ever been laid off or fired or let go from a job. But really understanding that, hey, that was my identity, a piece of it, but not the whole thing. And the piece of it that still remains is I still have the heart of a kind, caring, compassionate person that wants to help people and wants to make a difference in the world and let people know they're not alone, and just kind of hopefully leave the world in a little better place than I came into it as.
That's a good thing. That's a very cool thing. And congratulations, by the way, your first year, 50 episodes. That's fabulous. That's when you're doing something, because by that point you have a real good sense not only of what you're doing with the show, but how you feel about it.
Yes. And not only that, though, what I love and what I tell people the most is you don't expect to be perfect, because I wasn't a professional. I wasn't an expert in it. I was just a listener. But it's like, if you were to go back and you listen to some of my first episodes, and then you listen to some of my newer episodes, if you watch them, if you look at the quality, the editing, everything, it's just exponentially different. So the progress and the growth is kind of that point. And you can kind of see my journey because it's been like a real time diary, if you want to call it that, a journal, if you will. But it's been kind of you're watching me grow. The audience, the listener is on a journey with me as I go through this and discuss my own woes and troubles and things that I'm trying to change or improve on. But as well as, now moving to guests and kind of keeping on theme and offering listeners, whether it's tips or tricks, but also keeping other people's stories alive. I interviewed a gentleman whose daughter unalived herself at 16 years old, I believe. And so, keeping that alive, telling their stories and allowing other people to hear that and possibly set up a connection if they too themselves are going through a hardship like that. So, it's kind of multifaceted, multi-purpose, but it feels purposeful and it gives me purpose and I enjoy it. And as long as it does that, then I'm going to continue to do it.
Yes. Well, I've been doing this one for about 12 years now.
Oh, wow.
Anne Marie was actually a long time listener. How long have you been listening to the show, Anne Marie? Do you remember?
Oh, well, I was a listener for about 3 years before I joined, and I've been a co-host for 3 years. So yeah, about 6 years I've been on board one way or another.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you've told me many times how you've been following my journey. So exactly what Richard's talking about.
Absolutely. I see a different Walt to when I first used to watch. I mean, you've always been amazing, but yeah, I've just seen it grow completely and seen you grow along the way. It's quite a beautiful little journey to watch. Which
is helpful because unless you have that kind of input, you often don't really recognize your own growth.
No. Yeah,
Right?
we don't. I always say that, you have to remember that others don't see us necessarily the way we see ourselves. And sometimes, I've interviewed a couple of coaches lately and, we always talk about even Olympic athletes have coaches. The best of the best have coaches. And sometimes a coach is just that mirror to hold up to you to let you see that progress. Or if you maybe need to pivot a little bit, it allows you to see that. And so, kind of like you said, is we don't often see ourselves the same way. And so it's hard to recognize that growth unless you look for it.
And we see it too, because like Anne Marie said, it was 6 years, I think you said. So in those 6 years that you've been listening, and like you said, I've also known you directly in the last 3 years, I've seen the growth in her. I've seen how she has expanded and become the person that she's become now. We were kind of talking about that before you logged in with us today, about how over that period of time, very early on when you're first starting off with a podcast or you're starting off with just putting your message out there and so forth, there's like this, you're inhibited. You're kind of holding back, like, oh, am I good enough to do this and so forth. And Anne Marie, I know, went through that. And now I look at her 3 years later, and she's entirely different in that way. I mean, she's opened up, she's become this expert and all that kind of stuff. Literally, Richard, in after her first episode, she contacted me. She said, "I'm not sure if I'm good enough to do this." I mean, that's not what her wording was, but that's what it amounted to. I don't know that I have anything to contribute to this. And of course, I knew, and the audience knew, of course, she had a lot to contribute, but now she sees it.
Yeah,
and that's so cool.
It's that imposter syndrome. It's that.
Yeah.
We all feel a little nervous to publish, or kind of like you said, like, what makes me qualified to be a podcaster? And I'm a very start at the basics, start simple, go back to basics, fundamentals, first things first. And the way I've always kind of justified it to myself is, even if nobody listens to it, this is a place that my daughters can go and maybe here's some lessons, here's some good conversations, but also here's some of my mistakes that I've been open with. And that was kind of one of the things that really encouraged me to be as open as I have been and as vulnerable as I have been, is that, I've kept journals probably 20 years at least. And I always said, one day when I'm no longer here, they're going to find my journals in this big crate and they're going to know exactly what I was thinking. Well, fast forward, now they kind of get that opportunity. They're not going to have to read it. Right. But, we're in a different age. We're evolved. And this is the platform now, and this is how we get the information. And if nothing else, my stories, my information will outlive me and be there for family members, for my daughter, if they have kids and grandkids and all that. And whether it's those lessons or to know a little bit of piece of, I can imagine if we had podcasts when my grandparents were alive or my great grandparents, what you would be able to know and see the world through their eyes, especially because we're of different generations and before technology, so I'm just turned 48 and it's quite a different time, but yeah, that's how I justify it to myself. Anytime I'm a little nervous about being vulnerable, I say, look, your daughter might need this one day. So do it, say it. Don't leave it unsaid.
I kind of did the same thing, especially with the first part of what you said about how, well, no one's listening just yet. That's how I justify it to myself. If no one's listening, then I could screw up and it was no big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've mentioned many times, the big shock was when I got my first email from a listener, because then it finally dawned on me that I actually had listeners.
Yeah.
That was actually more scary than starting it, to be perfectly
honest. It is, because you don't know what to expect. It was like when I joined the Podcast Connection Network, when the founder originally reached out to me, I was like, I had to have my wife read it because I was so nervous and paralyzed. I'm like, he could be complaining. Maybe I said something bad. Maybe I said something wrong. Why is this person reaching out to me? We automatically, but I was still in that space of imposter and doubt and fear. And that's just the proof. I couldn't even read an email from something that was going to be good for me.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely how you can see the journey and my growth if you listen to the episodes. And like I said, it's definitely meant to let others know, like, hey, you're not alone. We all struggle. Even if we've been successful, we still have a pocket full of marbles ready to throw in our own path at any given time.
Yeah. You reminded me too of what I felt like when I got that first email. Because it was the same feeling that you just described, like, oh God, I really don't want to open this.
Oh, I sat on it for days. I sat on it for weeks through the new year.
I actually put it off for a couple of days. I knew it was sitting there and I just didn't even want to look at it. I couldn't bring myself to have to deal with it. And of course it was very complimentary. Otherwise, it would have been even harder, but it was just so easy. And yet I built up in my mind this fear. And I think you're right. Part of it was imposter syndrome, but part of it was, oh God, one more problem to deal with. I automatically assumed it was a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird how we do that.
How crazy is that?
Yeah. And as it goes, and that's kind of the thing. And like we were talking before the recording started, like, when you get up from a conversation and you feel energized and you feel good and you go back and you edit it, like for me, and I get to enjoy it a second time, and you're like, man, I feel like I'm in the right place. I'm headed in the right direction, because kind of what I left out of the first part of the story was the reason I, outside of the chirping in my ear from my dad and my daughter saying start a podcast, was starting the podcast gave me direction, something to focus on, and something to do. And it was slow, but then once I joined the Podcast Connection Network, and then I started having guests, and then I started learning to edit, because they weren't just solo Spotify for podcasters anymore. And then I wanted YouTube. And so watching the evolution of it all is the magical part. And that's kind of outside of the stories. If anyone listens to my podcast, that's kind of what I want people to keep in mind, is to look at the journey, how it didn't start off as perfect, but as with many things in life, there's never a perfect time, and you're not going to be an expert at something that you're just starting. But the thing is just start, just get going, just get moving, and dedicate time to being consistent. And, I think part of that consistency issue is that what you mentioned, that imposter syndrome kind of thing, is you doubt yourself. Do I have anything to contribute? Am I good enough? Do I belong here with all these other people? And, I think you do if you want to,
Mhm.
but you have to believe it,
Mhm.
and you just have to. Everybody has it. I've done what, 50, over 50. And before I came on camera, I'm still shaking it out. I still get nervous. I still peed twice in 15 minutes. It's just that way. But that's okay. And I try to really go, hey, look, you're excited, you're not anxious, you're
Mhm.
excited. You're not nervous, maybe a little, but you're excited because they're very close the same. That imposter syndrome, you use it to push you forward. You use it to go, hey, how could I do better? How do I belong if I feel like I don't belong? But also realizing that uncomfortable ability, that discomfort is where the growth is happening. And I always imagine, especially like you, I look at you, you said you've been doing this for 12 years. I hope 12 years from now, I look back and I go, man, these were the good times. This was the fun part. Even as messy as it was, all the learning, all the mistakes, all the late nights, all the, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I always tell myself that I'm going to look back and go, man, those were the good times. Those were the great times. And I sure miss them. And I try not to never let that get lost on me and really try to enjoy what I'm doing now because I know I'll appreciate it, even if it's not perfect.
Well, I've got some good news for you. The good news is that you do look back that way. The only thing that I would amend it is to say, not that they were, but they continue to be. Because one of the reasons why I'm still doing it 12 years later is because I found how much I love doing something that I didn't know I was going to love. That's not one of my motivations why I first became involved in the podcast. I became involved because I've been going through some horrible crap and I didn't understand how to get out of it. I didn't understand what I was doing wrong because I thought I'd been doing what I've always done and it wasn't working anymore. And I didn't understand why. So I had to bring experts on it to teach me how stuff worked. I never expected I was going to love it. But after I'd done, I think probably 50 was about where it all started to kick in. Like, wow, this is really good stuff. I'm enjoying this. I'm getting a lot out of that. From that point on, it wasn't so much getting nervous each time. It was more like getting excited. And for me, it's more the actual recording of it. Like I almost never listen. Emery, do you listen to the podcast episodes we record together? Because I don't, but I'm wondering if you do.
I tend to make notes as I go through on when I get good grabs, but sometimes I do go back and watch them.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Sometimes, not every week, but sometimes I do, just because if there's been a really good nugget and I've forgotten it, or it's like impacted me or really made me feel good, I listen to it with the background while I'm working.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you find when you go back that you get the same level of excitement and energy from what you do when you do it, or is it a different level?
I tend to cringe because nobody likes listening to their own voice.
True.
But yeah, the level of interest is still 100%, and it still makes me
okay,
energized. Yeah, but you've got to remember, I was a listener before, and this show actually like put me on a route that really completely changed my life.
So you have a very positive association coming into it.
Absolutely, because it was through you that I found coaches and mindset practices and thing, and then doing that gave me the confidence to then come on and co-host. That's all from your show. So even if you change one life, you're doing a great job.
So I always say when I interview people, one of the things that is kind of a topic theme in the podcast as it's evolved is when people have this courage to take a step, such as you, and what's like the unexpected thing that came out of it that never would have happened, that you never could have imagined it happening had you not done this. And kind of your explanation was you change one life, you can change a perspective, how they see things. Maybe have them, if they leave asking themselves a question that they've never asked themselves, and that leads to something, then yeah, it's all worth it. Because I always try to think like there's one person out there who needs to hear this message today. And if they get that message and it helps them, and moves them forward, then it's all worth it to me.
Yeah. You're right. Well, not only is there one person who's ready to hear the message, I also find that every single thing that is discussed on an episode, there is somebody who wants to hear that little bit of it.
Yes.
Which is why I don't edit anymore, by the way. I haven't edited in a few years now because I realized even by editing, I was taking out the good parts.
I'm getting better with it. I'm sticking to the ums and the you-knows,
Yeah.
but
yeah, but I get rid of those too. I mean, I don't get rid of those either. I leave those in because that's part of what
natural
makes it a real
conversation.
thing.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day, a pretty big one, and I kind of heard some of the same things, and it made me think like, like that is kind of the natural progression, the natural rhythm of the conversation. Maybe I should leave it in. And I'm kind of toying because, editing is the part that takes the most time. But I still like the episode I'm editing today. Like just getting to hear some of that information, that reminder of what it is, like how you're limiting yourself, how your brain, those kinds of things. I mean, it's just being able to hear that stuff again. When you asked her the question, I would say when I go for that second listen, I don't know that I'm as excited, but when I hear something and there's something that goes, oh, yes, I forgot about that. And then you're like almost more excited than the first time you heard it.
Whoa.
Because you're like, I totally forgot about that. And that's kind of like a little bonus nugget of something I needed to hear for my day to shift my mindset or to just remember who you are, why you started, why you do what you do, and that you're not an imposter. Don't let your own mind play tricks on you.
I was sitting here thinking about this. Oh, go ahead, Emery. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think people want to see that imperfection. I think people want to relate to that because, we all not all, but we idolize like celebrities and stuff, and we think their lives are perfect, and actually they're not. And it's nice to relate to a human being who's going through similar things as you, the same feelings. And, it's great to hear that you feel like you have imposter syndrome because you would look at your playlist. Your playlist looks amazing on your podcast. It looks really interesting. And it's just funny that, we all have those little niggles in our head, but it's great to hear how people work through them.
Well, and I would say that in the nuggets of wisdom too, they come through, these little reminders kind of come through, and their realizations as kind of in real time of, like I always thought like I would go from manager to director to VP, whatever, like however in my healthcare career. But it took a while to realize, look, 6 years of interviewing people for jobs was incredible experience for a podcast host.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I never put it together, because that wasn't even on my radar. And, part of the starting the podcast, part of getting over the destroying of my identity was just like a breakup. I had to forgive the company that laid me off and forgive them, and then start looking for those little things that they actually gave me that were good. Like, look, I ran 2 clinics that are multi-million-dollar businesses. I know how to manage people. I know how to work with physicians who aren't the easiest people to work with, personality wise. So all the interviews, a budget, mission statements, a clear vision for your podcast, your brand, whatever it is, marketing, how they do that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot, and I thought everything I was learning was going to be to propel my career in one direction. But it actually turned out that all these lessons I were learning were actually very relevant to becoming a podcaster. I just didn't know it. I just didn't see it. And that's kind of part of that message for everybody out there is, you may not be in the exact place you want to be right now, but don't let that deter you, and don't let that take away from the experience of what you are doing. And just because something isn't right up your alley, don't negate it. Like, I didn't like being shorthanded and having to interview a bunch of people for jobs, but it sure as heck turned out to be very beneficial as a podcast host. So, you don't want to discount some of the tasks you're doing, some of the experiences you're having, because they might just turn out to be very useful down the road in a path that you never imagined yourself on.
You're right too, because that is the kind of thing that you don't know until after you've been down that road and look back on it. You don't know it in the middle of it. You have to look back, and then you start to see all the different ways that things connected together that you didn't anticipate, stuff that you never would have associated, taking A, B, and C and putting them in the same lump and saying, whoa, wait a minute, they don't really go together, but they do. They go together in a way you never, ever anticipated. That's exactly what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably, I even had an epiphany on one the other day, and I was like, if I had made director and got a big salary increase due to that, if I'd gotten laid off, I may have been searching for directorate jobs, because guess what? I would have been more comfortable. But staying at a manager level, manager salary, and then when I tried to go back into healthcare and they want to pay me less than I was making 2-3 years ago, I'm like, or relocate, I'm like, absolutely not. But it was that not wanting, being at that level, going, I don't have to go back to that. And that's what gave me the courage to say, why not start a podcast? Because, I didn't think about it, but it's like, oh, if I'd made director, I'd have been more monetarily comfortable. There would have been much more pressure to pursue that job, both from my wife, my family, and to get back to that level of being comfortable. And I may have just let this opportunity of being a podcaster pass me by. If that dream, or what I thought was the dream at the time, had come true. And so, we just have to be very mindful when we don't get what we want. Sometimes it's for a reason, and you get to determine how you look back on it, but it's always hindsight. But you got to try to take it in stride while you're going through it. And that's kind of the practice I'm in now. The phase of things I'm in now is learning, when I experience discomfort, to sit through it, identify it, learn what it means to me, and then move on with it. Where before, I think, one thing I did was I drank too much. I avoided. I tried to numb, and that didn't work out so great.
It never does.
It never does. It never does. So, and that's why I always say, like, stopping drinking alcohol was step one, determining a real baseline. Stop avoiding, sit and face your issues, journal. There's no way through it but to go through it. So there's no shortcuts. There's no paths around. And what I describe it as is, if you don't deal with it now, it's like putting a book on a shelf. When it all comes to a stop, now you got a case full of books to read that you never dealt with. And working 6 years in a level 1 trauma center, and then managing and having that all come to a stop after 12 years during the pandemic, was like, I put a lot of books on the shelf. I've seen a lot of bad things, a lot of trauma, a lot of death, and never dealt with it. And then when I tried to, it was alcohol and avoidance. And it wasn't until I really hit rock bottom and things were unmanageable, and marriage wasn't great, relationships weren't great, just nothing was great. I just kind of have to stop it all and just start from scratch and develop a plan and start going in a direction. And the podcast was the direction for me. And I'm hoping some of the stories and lessons I have are valuable to others.
Well, I think it's also valuable to ourselves. I'm like I said earlier, that's one of the reasons why I've been doing it all this time. I mean, the nominal topic was law of attraction. We pretty much covered that in the first 400 episodes, and that got done about 6 years ago.
Right.
Since then, it's just keep going with doing the podcast because it's fun, because it's energizing, because it builds me up. It's literally where I get my energy every single week. In fact, for the longest time, I was doing it 5 days a week. I've actually reduced it down to 3 days a week, or three shows a week, actually, just to get more of my schedule back. But I love it so much because of that energy that I get from it. It's one of the reasons why I've got this project that I was mentioning before that I'm focusing on trying to get that same experience into other people's hands. It's why I'm so energized every time I do the episode, and why I don't really care to listen to it again, because for me, it's the direct connection that happens when we're having the conversation, when Anne Marie and I are talking, and we welcome you onto the show, and we're doing all this, that energy, it's an energy that is missing today. I made the observation recently that it's missing completely from social media. We call it social media, and there's no socializing. What the hell? Social media should be socializing, but there's no socializing on social media. And that socializing has such an energetic transfer that I want more and more people to have. So I've got this service I'm creating to help reintroduce that factor into the online world we have today. Because I recognized it, I saw it, I felt it from the very beginning, how I was getting this boost. I was getting this juice just from having these live interactions like this. And Anne-Marie, I'm willing to bet is one of the reasons why I was able to get you to stay as a co-host, because that energy, it becomes, I mean, he was talking about numbing it with alcohol, but when you do the energy routine, it doesn't numb it. It excites it, enhances it. It turns fear into, oh my God, I can't wait for the next time I'm going to talk about this thing.
I love the fact that we do this on a Monday, and it's a really great start to my week. And it really sort of sets my week off in a really nice direction. Yeah. Because I got that buzz for the rest of the week. Get Monday out of the way.
So it's funny. I actually, other than being a guest, I take every Monday off. I've always, I don't know why I hate them, but Monday's especially when my daughter was in school, I go, Monday's my day to catch up on anything I need to listen to, because sometimes I'm listening to podcasts as research for guests I'm going to interview or whatnot. But that's my time to listen to the stuff I started off listening to that I still enjoy. And other than a guest episode, that's my one day a week that everybody gets to join the rat race. And I purposely do not. But, that's by design. I had to kind of make that happen. But, a lot of times through the weekends, I mean, there's some Saturdays and Sundays I can spend 10, 12 hours editing 2 episodes, doing back office stuff, planning for the next ones, listening, but it doesn't feel quite the same 12 hours I used to put in healthcare. I can tell you that. There is a sense of excitement. And I noticed too, the way I know I enjoy it is I have to carve out time for certain things. I have, like last night, my wife was gone. I edited. And when she came home, I said, I'm going to stop editing when she gets home so we can have dinner. We can watch a show together and stuff like that. But also, I remember one time booking this guest and we're watching Survivor because that's one of the things we do together. And while I'm watching this, I'm sitting here going, like, thinking of all the questions I want to ask this person. I go, okay, you have to focus. I'm like, this is how you know you're excited about it and you love it, because it's kind of all consuming. And I haven't been Ubering as much as I used to. But one of my favorite things about Ubering was I could sit there and listen to podcasts while I was kind of making money. And so it was kind of like this dual purpose. And a lot of my time spent delivering is listening, thinking, but then I'm sitting there, I'm having to sit with, because I got the Uber app open, I'm having to like keep the voice recorder open so I can make memos of questions. Because if not, I have running lists and you hear something on another podcast and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I need to write that down. I need to record that. I need to do something. So yeah, but I haven't been Ubering as much because I've been dedicating more time to this. And but that's the way I want it. It's taken some time, and but yeah, I love it.
It's having that flexibility after sort of doing 12-hour shifts, having that flexibility to be able to fit the family in when you need to do the jobs when you need to, and have fun with it along the way. Sounds like an
Yeah,
ideal work.
my daughter too, you know, she could use CapCut better than me through TikTok. And, you know, she's 10, she goes to an art school. They're already taking graphic design. The junior high students write the plays. The junior high students write the plays for the elementary to perform. And then the junior high students actually run all the sound, visual, audio, all this stuff for like their plays and stuff in the auditorium.
Awesome.
And so she wants to become part of this. So as I approach the first year, my goal is, okay, they don't have a high school, this art school, so she'd have to go to a different school, but maybe getting her through junior high. And then maybe we take off and podcast mobily, drive around and interview people, but she wants to be part of it and I want her to be part of it. And when she's a little more mature and can listen to some of the conversations that are had, and I feel comfortable with her editing them and hearing the content, then I'll let her. But the idea is to grow this to be a family business, to have her included in it because she likes it. She was the one who said I should do it, and she wants to be part of it. And I want to nurture that and encourage that. And there's nothing more I'd love than to grow up to have my daughter as a co-host, a producer, whatever, you know, but just to be able to be around her and do something I love with her would be, that's the dream.
Well, that's fabulous that you want to do it with family like that. I also love the idea that you're talking about taking it on the road.
Yeah.
I thought about that a couple of times, but somehow that was never really a direction for me, but it sounds like it is for you.
Well, I'm thinking with, you know, because there's a couple options for her high school, but they're not going to offer what she's offered like through this art school. So as an adult, I go, what better way to learn about history than travel to all 50 states, eat their cuisine, meet their people, see some of the landmarks.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to get bored reading it in a book, listening to somebody explain it. But, you know, when you start to pick up, like it took me as an adult, you know, I was in the Navy at 17. I've been overseas. I've been around other cultures, seen other places, and it's so eye-opening. And I think at a young age to be able to do that and to understand, you know, to go, oh, you know, New Orleans has a lot of Sicilians because outside of New York, you know, they're the second most Sicilian population outside of New York and Sicily. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Well, the Louisiana Purchase and how people migrated and why they came and ships and ports. And, you know, history was they never explained all this kind of stuff in school. They just tell you this is what you need to know. This is the test. They don't give you the why. They don't tell you why certain people end up in certain places, how they get there. Why is there big, you know, whether it's Arab or Muslim communities in Michigan, or, you know, are they the places that take the refugees or whatever? You know, we have this whole border thing. I don't know what that's going to be like in 5 years and what kind of topic that's going to be, because I'm from Texas. You know, I don't live near the border, but we are a border state. And so, yeah, I think maybe instead of high school, we homeschool, on the road school, and in life school, immersion. And I think she could learn probably so much more than, because I don't foresee her being a STEM, you know, math and science person. She doesn't like it. She's an art. She's a creative. And I want to nurture that. And yeah, I think that's the plan. That's what I have in my 5-year vision right now.
I love that. Awesome. I can't say I've been in all 50, but growing up, my family did the same thing. I've been in 43, 44 states. Awesome. And you're right. It's a total education. I mean, yeah, it's an experience. Yes. But it's also educational at the same time.
Well, and you learn how not to be, you learn the things she's going to need to know when she goes off into the world herself. You know, it's like if she wants to, you know, we have a 21 and a 20-year-old too. You know, it's like if they want to go to New York by themselves. I mean, I went to Japan. I had my 19th birthday in Japan. So, but that was in the 90s. It was way different. But you want to give them that skills because they're young women, and I want them to be wise enough to where if they were to go to New York City by themselves, that they're wise enough to not get scammed, not get kidnapped, not get robbed, keep their wits about them, know what to look for, know what to understand, know where not to go. Because back when I had to travel in the Navy, I still had a road atlas to drive between like Texas, Florida, and the different places. It was way different. And I tell her, I would write down the directions on a note card, and I would put the note card on my visor, and I could go take a right at this place, take this exit, make sure you go on this route. So I had a little thing, so I'm not flipping through a map or an atlas.
Right.
But yeah, that was the kind of creative you had to be before TomToms and smartphones.
I love that. That's funny, but it's true. It's absolutely true. But for me, the big benefit I got from traveling, particularly when I was young, when my family was traveling, was I gained an appreciation not just for the different aspects of history and so forth, but for the different people, the different lifestyles that people have around the country. I mean, today there's a lot of talk about there's all this political division and stress and all that kind of thing. I just think back to the people that I've met over the years through those travels, and the differences seem minimal to me. I mean, I see what other people are seeing, but I just don't see it the same way. It actually helped to inform me as I was in the process of learning how I was going to navigate that world and how I was going to deal with it. Because in my younger years, I was a very political person. The experience, though, that I had as a very young person was one of the factors that helped me to leave that behind and to stop being so upset and divisive and all that kind of thing, to the point where I could actually start appreciating viewpoints that I didn't appreciate before. I could actually start to feel good about stuff that I would have railed against in the past. The experience that I had meeting people around the country made that a whole lot easier. Then add in doing the podcast for the last 12 years. And you know what that's like, because you get guests from everywhere. That expands the number of people, it expands the number of perspectives that I've encountered, that I've interacted with, that I've come to know and appreciate. And as Anne-Marie knows, I've said this many times, I actually like it better when I have a perspective I disagree with. Yes. And by like, I don't mean, it's not like I like the person. I actually, that can actually be kind of a little stressful to go through it. I like what I learned from it. Yeah. I learned what I get. I mean, because I learned so much more. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You pick up more, right? I mean, it's always a love fest when you're talking with somebody that you agree with, but you can only go so far with that.
Well, but also with that though, you have to realize that having the conversation is, even if we have opposing views, it's not necessarily about trying to convert one another, trying to whatever. Right. It's just about appreciating another view and seeing what you can take from it. Like I'm going to interview a Scientologist. I was on the fence about it, but I'm an open-minded person. I want to hear, hey, if how he thinks Scientology or Dianetics could be beneficial for anxiety or mental health or whatever, I'm open to hear it. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree or whatever, but I'm open to hear it and see, because we're all so similar, yet we fight over what's different as opposed to coming together of what's similar. And, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Muslim, Baptist, Catholic, you want to call it God, the universe, whatever it is. Look, water is water. We all need it. And maybe we all call it something different in different parts of the country, in different languages. But water is water. We all know what it is. We all know that we need it. And whether you call it God, the universe, and connectivity, it's the same.
One of the things I've come to appreciate also is just how connected we are, including those of us who disagree. Yeah. That took me a while to handle that one. The idea that I'm actually connected to these people that I really disagree with, or maybe even don't even like. But once I came to terms with that, once I came to realize, well, I am connected to them. They are really connected to me. That in some ways we're all the same.
Yeah.
That's a different perspective. And
Do
it's
you
a
ever think?
healthy
You ever
one.
think like if you disagree with, or if there's something you don't like about somebody, I turn it back and go, if I don't like that about them, is it because I don't like it about myself and I do the same
Yeah,
thing
well, that's a
I'm
fair
doing?
point.
I
Yeah.
was going to say that. Because sometimes, it's what we don't like in ourselves that we're seeing, and that's what's
Yes.
repelling us.
And so then you have to ask yourself if that can be true, is that opposing viewpoint you had, is it actually opposing? Or is it your viewpoint that you don't like about yourself and that's why you're opposed to it? I think there's a lot of some truth in that. And I've heard like the mindset mentor Rob Dial. I listen to him and he's like, anytime like somebody offends me or this or that, or I find something, I have this inkling I don't like this person or something about them, I just switch and go, what are 3 things I like about them? Or 3 compliments I can do. I've even done it with my wife, like if she irritates me or something, I go, okay, slow down.
Yeah.
Think about the 3 things you love about her.
Sure.
And, realize whatever you're aggravated about is probably small potatoes. And, maybe your own insecurity or your own stuff that you're wrapped up with. It may not even be the other person. But, unless you take that time, and maybe, you don't necessarily have to hit rock bottom, but unless you take this time to really work on looking at yourself and understanding yourself and working through stuff like that, and understanding that some of the negativity you've experienced in your life is merely there to contrast and let you know how grateful you should be for the life you actually have. Once you start looking at that and understanding that, then I think that's where the real progress happens and the real leaps forward in your personal growth and development happen. And that's kind of been me. I'd say the past 6 months have been more growth, but it's been a couple-year journey.
Mm-hmm.
At least.
You're reminding me of something which on the surface doesn't sound like it's connected, but it really is. There are a number of Facebook groups that I created a number of years ago, regionally based where I'm located. I'm in the Northeast in Connecticut. And I currently have other people who are administering. So I'm not really involved in them on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
But because I'm still an administrator and the founder of the groups, I still get occasional messages. And I got a message from somebody who had their post removed. She had posted anonymously in the group, and which is something we kind of discourage, even though Facebook approves of that, but we kind of discourage it. And there'd been a tussle about, I think she was like criticizing a local restaurant or something like that. And other people were taking offense to that. And so there was this whole thing that went on. And so she and I were talking after, we were chatting after I had my, I initially answered her question and she was okay with that. But she made the comment that people can be so judgmental. And that why is it that people have to be so judgmental? Why can't they just be more, understanding, or, just recognize, well, I'm just expressing an opinion. Why can't they appreciate that? And what was really ironic about it is that the people who were being judgmental were being judgmental about her for being judgmental about the restaurant.
Yeah.
and so I pointed out to her like, this is like a two-way street, because that's what was happening here. And it was like the conversation froze because that hadn't occurred to her. We have this tendency to think other people are judgmental, not so much I'm judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
How rarely do we actually think, well, I'm the one being judgmental here? It's usually, no, it's the other guy who's doing it. The other guy's the problem here. I'm fine.
Yeah. And then, but then, kind of like you say, it's once you're aware, it's kind of like things you can't unsee. Then it's harder to become unaware. But then it's healthy for yourself, because then you pick up on yourself like, hey, you reach that level of awareness of going, maybe I shouldn't speak out on this restaurant, because then I'm being like a person I'm not, or something I detest, that judgmental person. But
Well,
yeah, it's
the
all
other
through
thing I think
self-awareness.
there's a thing that happens, I think, and I made this analogy to her. I said it's kind of like the judicial system, because a judge who sits in a courtroom and issues, judgments and so forth, they don't think of themselves necessarily as being judgmental. They think of themselves as being dispensers of justice.
Mm.
And in fact, in any given court case, one side wins, the other side loses, right? So the winning side inevitably will feel like they achieved some level of justice. The losing side will inevitably feel like they were judged. So here's the interesting question. If the judge and the winning side both think of themselves as being involved in justice, but the losing side perceives the judge as being a judge, as someone who has judged them, which perception is the accurate one? And to my mind, the answer is yes, both of them. They're right. They're both right. But
Yeah.
how rarely does the judge think of himself or herself as being judgmental? And I
Yeah.
think that's what happens across all of society. We don't think of ourselves as being judgmental. We're just expressing an opinion. We're just saying what we think. That's not being judgmental. That's the way we justify it to ourselves. It's the other person who's doing all the judging.
Yeah. And that's in context. I think about an episode I did on it was kind of like about divorce, and I talked about, people being adults for their children. Why are you going to let strangers decide your custody arrangement and stuff like that, or how you should parent your children, unless you got bad parents and the courts need to step in. But you have to realize you're going into a system where everybody wants to win.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. So whether they're not necessarily taking what's best for you or your children into account, they're not there. They're lawyers. They're there to win. Mm-hmm. And is that the people you want meddling in your family affairs? If you're Kevin Costner and you're worth $350 million or something, then maybe when it's like that, sure. When there's lots of assets, I think there's some, but maybe with that stuff, it needs to be lawyered up and divided up. But when it comes to your family, why would you let people who type A personalities, who all want to win, and a judge, strangers outside of your family circle, decide what's best for your family?
If they're winning, you're probably losing.
Yeah.
But and part of it is because our two older ones are stepdaughters, or they're my stepdaughters, but they're my wife's original daughters. But I'm friends with my wife's ex-husband. We've raised them all together, and we've kind of had to make it work. And I knew this when I started dating her. Look, he's always going to be their father. I'm not trying to replace anything. And we've gotten along, and we've been together 18 years. And so we've watched them all grow, and it takes a village. And he treats mine and our 10-year-old daughter no different than he treats them. And the grandparents are the same way. And, for so many years, people looked at the arrangement of, our relationship, and that him and I will go out and do stuff, or that we all went to Disney together, or that I've stayed at his house on New Year's Eve. People look at that and they judge that, and they go, how could you? That's your wife's ex-husband, and blah, blah, blah. And how are y'all friends, and this and that. And people thought we were crazy for the longest time. But the thing is it's what's best for the kids, and they've turned out okay. Mm-hmm. And they see an example of, hey, it's not about that winning and trashing the other parent. And, and it took me a long time of understanding that, hey, sometimes just, my parents divorced when I was 20, I think, or 19. And it wasn't easy, but you grow up to have your own relationships and go, sometimes two adults just aren't made for each other. And that's okay. But, if you create a child together or have something together, then, just share that responsibility and remember that it's not about you. It's about them and what's best for them. And, you need to temper your behavior and your expectations accordingly. But yeah, like I said, I'm not a fan of people who don't want to act like adults and do what's best for the situation they created, and instead headed off to total strangers who want to do nothing. Their careers based on winning.
Anne-Marie, I'm sure I speak for you when I say that this has been fun. This has been fascinating.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Don't you feel
Really
like we know
interesting.
the hosts of the Men of the House podcast a whole lot better than an hour ago, just because of
What
this?
I'm about.
Yeah, and it's lovely to listen to sort of what's happened, the obstacles you've gone through, how you've grown in the last year, and how you've actually just gone for your dream, just gone for it. It's been really entertaining.
Oh, still going for it. I still get nervous, but I'm like, look, I've done 2 marathons, the Bataan Death March in New Mexico, 26.2 miles through White Sands Missile Range, 12,000 elevation change. It's brutal, but your dream, you don't see the finish line when you start, but you know that it's there. You got to trust, and you just got to keep going. You can't see the full 26 miles. You just got to go through it and figure it out along the way. Nurse yourself along the way, but a lot of it has to do with having that confidence and knowing as long as you don't quit, you'll make it. Just don't stop, don't quit, don't doubt, just keep going, one foot in front of the other, keep putting out episodes, keep it, and I'm reminded of that when I edit and I get to hear that conversation for a second time. It's like, yeah, this is it. This is the right thing. And I was fortunate enough to actually be a guest in person. It's not released yet, at a studio in Austin, through another podcaster. And, that was my first in-studio experience, face-to-face. And that was a lot of fun. And kind of like, if this wasn't the place and you weren't in the right direction, then I don't think these doors would be opening. And so I just kind of have a little bit of faith, and I've had some stumbling blocks along the way, but with the people in the Podcast Connection Network, they were there to lift me up and kind of put wind in my sails when I couldn't put wind in my own sails. And kind of reminded me of something I had inside of me all along. I just needed to be reminded that you are that person and you can do it. And you've done all these hard things. There's no reason you can't do this. It's just a matter of you believing in yourself. And there's other people that believe in me, so why not believe in myself?
Yeah.
And so part of it's, hey, let's give it back to others, and encourage people to take that leap, because although I'm busier than I've ever been to a degree, I'm also happier and more fulfilled than I've ever been.
Beautiful.
And I get to spend time with my daughter.
Yeah.
My wife's off today, so it's like we get these, we don't have to worry about who's calling in if the daughter's sick. We don't have to worry about this, that, the other. This is what I do. This is who I am. And I love the freedom, flexibility it provides me for my personal life. Even though I do work a lot, late nights, early mornings, but I do love it. And I feel like I'm in the right place.
That's a good
It's
thing.
on your terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and people think money, this, that, the other. Freedom. Being able to, when my daughter's sick at school and my wife can't go get her and I can, I can drop everything I'm doing and go do that. When she needs me to stay home with her and take her to the doctor, I can. I love that. There's no corporation is ever going to pay me what I'm worth. So I would rather give my worth to my daughter and the world and people who deserve it, people who will utilize it.
That's a really good thing.
Yeah, take myself out of that corporate rat race. That's something I don't ever see myself going back towards.
Interesting. Wow. See, we could do another hour on that alone.
It was good. It was good. It taught me a lot. I think it's good for some people, but I just don't think it's good for me, because my brain and my mouth, if I think something is dumb, I'm going to tell you.
You're not going to hold back. All right.
I'm kind of like this, I don't really care that you you're in the C-suite and I'm the basic manager. Like if it doesn't math, it doesn't math, or if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And I used to always tell my people, I go, look, hey, do the right thing and do what's best for the patient, and I'll always have your back. Because guess what? Doing the right thing and what's best never goes out of style. And if anybody above me, I don't care if you're the CEO, if you want to argue with me that we did what was best for the patient, and that's really all that matters. You can fire me, you can do whatever. I don't really care, but do what's right, do what's best for the people you serve in whatever avenue way you serve them. And that's all that really matters. You can put your head down at night and know that you did the right thing. And I think that kind of mentality and behavior just goes a lot further than in the long run. And like I said, it never goes out of style.
Yeah.
Doing the right thing.
Richard, there's one thing we need to get from you, and then two things we need to share with you before
All right.
we part company. The first thing we need to get from you is, I presume that your podcast is everywhere because that's what it usually is. But is there some particular place you like to direct people to find the podcast?
If you want the video version, it's YouTube, but Apple seems to be the preferred place for most listeners.
Mhm.
But if they want to, they can also listen directly from the Buzzsprout site.
Mhm.
And it's Buzzsprouts, I think, .the Men of the House. It'll, if you look up the Men of the House podcast, you'll come across it on my link.
I'll put it into the description and make it easy for people to find.
It's all available through there. So however you like to listen, wherever you want to listen, as long as you listen.
Yeah, right. As long as you listen, that's good. And then two things we need to share with you. First thing I want to share with you is something that I've been doing for the last couple of years, because I noticed that people like you and me and Anne Marie and other guests on the show, I mean, everybody who comes onto the show likes to give. We have different ways we want to help other people out. We've learned things along the way and so forth. We want to share them. But we don't often get credit for the ones that we share with that we never hear from. And that's what I realized I needed to kind of add something into the show. So, Richard, on behalf of those people that you've never met, you've never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've listened to your podcast, who have caught you on other shows and so forth, who you've helped in ways you didn't know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you are making a difference in this world.
Thank you. Give me chills.
Good. That's what that's intended to do. That's a good thing.
Now I can associate the feeling with my law of attraction and my manifestations of success, and that's why I started it. So
cool. Okay. And then the other thing that we need to do is, I always go to my co-hosts on this because they're all really good at this, including Anne Marie, finding that one way to tie it all together, put the bow on top. And I know Anne Marie's been kind of sitting there figuring out what she was going to say, because she she knows what's coming every show. So, it's always the same part of the show. So I'm sure she's got it lined up. But Anne Marie, what have you been focusing on as your takeaway today?
It's always so hard because there's always so much good stuff. But what I've taken from today, Richard, is how to learn from those moments when life's not going to plan. So those obstacles, and use them as benefits. And always trust that it's going to work out, and go for it. Just go for it.
That's the summary. That's probably the headline for the show today, of the episode. Just go for it.
Just
go for it.
Yeah.
Get chills again.
Then that's it. It's Richard Kraft, just go for it.
My job is done.
Truth and facts.
Excellent stuff. Richard, thanks so much for joining us. And
thank you for
congratulations on your first year of doing the show. I am confident you're going to be doing it for years to come. And the reason I'm confident is I can see in you the energy and excitement that I've been feeling for the last 12 years. So, yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to look forward to hearing more from Richard Kraft over the years, I'm sure.
Yes.
And one of the people I interviewed, you actually interviewed before I did, Darlene Green.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Because when I was listening to research before I interviewed her, I was like, oh, hey, I'm signed up to be on that podcast. And I thought it was good, and I was like, yeah, awesome. So
that's the other thing. I mean, there are tens of thousands of people who do regular podcasts. There are millions who have podcasts that they touch on occasionally, and yet it's a small community, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
there's a lot of overlap.
Well, it's kind of like the way I feel like with my growth is I feel like it's happened so slow, but so fast, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because as I approach a year, I go, man, like you look back and you're like, oh, that was so far away, but really a year is not that long.
Oh, it goes
And
like
then
that.
you go,
It
but
does.
look, oh my gosh, the past 6 months have just like, in progress and things happening. So yeah, it's fun, and that's part of the magic, and that's why you should go for it.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. I love it. So thank you, Richard, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Anne-Marie, as usual, for all your wonderful contributions, because you make it so much fun to do. I just love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. And it was a pleasure meeting both
Thank
of
you,
you.
Richard.
And I look forward to more conversations.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Awesome.